UBC psychiatry professor Dr. Kevin Solomons believes Malcolm Forbes, the son of the founder of Forbes magazine, knew exactly what he was talking about when he said, "Too many people overvalue what they are not and undervalue what they are." Dr. Solomons is a clinical associate professor at UBC who has spent many hours studying high and low self-esteem and the people who have it or don't. He is in the process of writing a book called Born to be Worthless: The Power of Low Self-Esteem. It is my pleasure to welcome Dr. Kevin Solomons to Studio 4 to tell us more. I hope we both have high self-esteem, but how do we know?
Well, self-esteem, it's a key concept or key psychological variable in our makeup. And I think my sort of route to that was working as a clinical psychiatrist, treating people who have a variety of what we think of as mental disorders or illnesses, and discovering that, you know, the standard approaches to treatment, particularly people who present with the sort of depression, anxiety spectrum of distress, that in spite of the treatments that we offer, even though some symptoms may improve, people remain at their sort of core unhappy. There's something missing. And so I got more and more sort of caught up in this dilemma, really, of people who ought to be getting better but don't seem to be.
So the pills numb them, sometimes help them a bit, but don't fix them.
Exactly. Pills are really good at reducing symptoms, and I think of them as sort of emotional anesthetics. They sort of numb the distress, but they don't, and they can't really fix what is underlying the source of the distress in the first place. And I became increasingly aware of that as seeing people who ought to be feeling better because their symptoms are better, but they don't. And my attention was drawn to trying to understand that, and that led me to an appreciation of self-esteem as an underlying problem rather than as a symptom.
And in terminology, self-esteem, self-worth, self-integrity, the same, different?
I think that they are the same. Self-esteem, self-worth are synonyms, really.
How is it formed in a human? When?
Well, let me tell you the conventional view as I understand it, which is that we arrive with a blank slate as infants or children.
Right, quite surprised when we come out of the chute, as they say. Hello, world. Where's that warm womb?
A little oblivious, I would say. But depending on our experiences, we will form positive or negative self-esteem. So I think the prevailing view is that if we are fortunate enough to have parents, and typically parents, early experiences of being valued, respected, supported, then we will develop healthy self-esteem.
At 6 months or 2 years or 7 years?
It's not clear. It's probably, from about 3 or 4 on. And it's an ongoing thing. And if we're unfortunate enough to have parents who are neglectful or undermining or hypercritical, then we will emerge with unhealthy self-esteem or negative self-esteem, with a poor self-image.
So if you have an unavailable parent,
that's
essentially,
the idea. Or a hypercritical
gone
parent.
a lot, hypercritical, no matter what you do, you're not good enough.
That's right. Yeah, you bring home the report card and it's 99%. They say, well, what about the other 1%?
Oh,
that sort
parent.
of idea. But what I discovered once I started paying attention to this was that a lot of people that I was seeing seemed to come from very healthy families, loving families, supportive families, and not only that, but in the rest of their lives, from the outside, the surface view was that their lives were very successful relationships, successful careers. They were getting a lot of affirmation from other sources, and yet they felt worthless. And that was a real paradox. How does one account for that? And that had me rethink the whole question of where self-esteem comes from. And the book really is what I sort of discovered in listening to people, examining my own kind of personal journey, and also sort of tuning into what clues we have in our culture, literature, etc.
And what are the clues? How do you know if you have a child who has high self-esteem, low self-esteem, if you are a person? As you suggest, you feel worthless in spite of all your accomplishments, or your wealth, or your beauty. You still don't feel good about you.
Yeah. Well, what I discovered was that the way in which I think self-esteem emerges is different from the conventional view. I don't really think it's a circumstantial, luck of the draw phenomenon.
Genetic?
I think self-esteem arises developmentally. That there are very specific conditions that influence the way in which we come to value ourselves, our lives. And I think that comes about early on, around the age of 3 or 4. And the way it comes down is that we understand that we're inherently worthless, which is a little counterintuitive.
Yes.
And surprising. And that arises for two specific, or under the influence of two specific, unrelated, developmentally normal, healthy phenomena. The first is the experience of having needs that go unmet, simply because one's mother or other primary caregiver is busy. It simply happens not to be there. Not because they're neglectful or intentionally, neglectful, but just because of circumstances. As we get older and more independent through the acquisition of language and motor skills, we lose proximity from our mothers. That's healthy, necessary.
Mother connection more important to a child than father connection? Does it depend on the sex? Male to male, female to male?
I don't think it really depends on the sex so much as the historical relationships of who forms the primary caregiver role, which historically is the mother.
Sure. So if you have a mother who praises you all the time, no matter what you do, she thinks it is superb. But you know somewhere inside that what you've done isn't perfect or isn't superb, in spite of the mother telling you or the father telling you.
That's right.
You're the best athlete, you're my favorite kid, the best person in the room, but there's something inside.
Well, you know
that tells you, I'm so not that.
Even that loving, encouraging, supportive mother, parent, family sometimes isn't there when you need them. And when, as young children, our needs go unmet, we fall apart.
What kind of needs? Physical needs, mental needs?
Whatever they are.
Whatever they are.
But often physical needs, right? If we wake up in the night afraid, and we call out and our mother's sleeping, right? I mean, and they don't respond in a time frame that is meaningful to the child, who doesn't yet have a sense of the linear nature of time, for example.
So you say you're there for me, and the neighbors think you're there for me, but you're really not there for me. You see this in adult relationships, in man-wife relationships, where he says, I love you, honey, and she says, well, why don't you value me?
Yeah, yes. But this is, you see, this isn't intentional. This is just, it just happens.
Kind of an accident.
No child can have a mother or a primary caregiver who is there 24/7. The only time that happens is in utero. And when our needs are not met in that way, we fall apart. I think of it as the Humpty Dumpty experience, where we literally fall apart because, our mother's not there. All the king's horses and all the king's men can't put us together again. All the therapists and babysitters and psychiatrists can't do it, because what we really need is our mother, and when she's not there, we fall apart.
So our first influences are extremely influential. What happens to someone who has a hard scrabble beginning in an orphanage? An Oprah, for instance, looks to me from the outside like she would have high self-esteem, high self-worth. Who knows if she does, unless you know her?
Well, let me say this, that when the child has that experience of, from the child's point of view, even though it's not the intention of the parent of record, from the child's point of view, it's abandonment. The child feels abandoned, and that's very threatening.
Right.
And the way all of us human beings deal with abandonment, or not abandonment, with threat, really, whatever the source of threat, is through thought and understanding. That we are Homo sapiens. We deal with threat not through strength or speed, but through understanding. And our capacity to understand evolves developmentally. And there's a certain point at which we are able to make sense of our experience, our threatening experience, and that's at a very particular time in the course of our intellectual development. A time that the psychologist Piaget has referred to as the stage of egocentric thinking, where whatever happens to us, we think is about us. If our parents have a fight, we think it's about us.
Okay.
Right?
And you can't do anything about it when you're 7.
That's normal, healthy development. And so when our mother isn't there when we need her, the way we understand that is that it's about us, not about her. We can't understand that she's at work or stuck in traffic because we have no concept of that.
Sure, and we all know when parents divorce, often the children will take the blame. It's our fault. We didn't do something right. My parents split up. I mustn't be okay.
That's exactly the point. We personalize the impersonal. Just because it happens to us in that egocentric way of thinking, we think it's about us.
Right. So how do we get beyond that to say, well, that happened, but it's not about me, without being self-absorbed?
Well, we need to. We need to personalize the impersonal, and that leads us to conclude that we're inherently worthless. If we were worthwhile, our mother would be there.
Or our father.
Or our father, or whoever it is that we need. And so we conclude that we are not worth their while for them to be there for us.
And is it a feeling inside? People who never feel joy, never feel, is it that kind of thing? I'm trying to figure out how you know you have it or you don't. Let's take a break. When we come back, we'll take the test. Okay. Dr. Kevin Solomon is our guest. He's an associate professor in psychiatry at UBC. We'll come back.